The sun rose over the Sahel with a muted intensity, painting the arid landscape in shades of ochre and crimson. In the capital of Ouagadougou, dust swirled across streets already alive with murmurs of change. Vendors arranged their colorful wares. Children ran barefoot past buzzing motorcycles, and somewhere in the distance, the hum of a military convoy punctuated the morning air. Today, the city seemed to vibrate with anticipation, though its pulse was not merely local. The world was watching, even if it did not yet fully understand why. For months, whispers had grown louder across West Africa. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso had begun moving in unison on issues that had long been considered untouchable. International law, foreign oversight, and global institutions had often dictated the limits of sovereignty for decades. But now, in an unprecedented regional alignment, these nations were challenging norms that the world had accepted without question. Analysts abroad called it risky, even reckless. Citizens at home called it liberation. Inside a heavily guarded government building, a coalition of top ministers, military advisors, and foreign liaison officers convened. Maps of West Africa lay spread across the polished table, dotted with colored pins marking borders, mineral-rich regions, and strategic locations for communications and defense. The mood was tense yet purposeful. Every decision carried consequences far beyond national borders. The agenda was clear: to announce a historic withdrawal from the International Criminal Court and, in the process, signal a recalibration of global alliances. Burkina Faso's leader, a man known for his measured demeanor and sharp intellect, rose to address the room. His voice, calm but authoritative, carried the weight of decades of struggle. "This is not a decision made lightly," he began. "It is not a rejection of justice. It is, however, a reaffirmation of our sovereignty and our responsibility to protect our people on our terms. The International Criminal Court has consistently demonstrated biases that undermine our autonomy. Our withdrawal is a statement that Africa will no longer accept a system where our agency is questioned, our choices constrained, and our leaders judged by distant powers with their own agendas." Nods of agreement circled the table. Ministers from Mali and Niger had joined the session via secure video links, their faces reflecting similar resolve. For years, these nations had contended with foreign intervention, both direct and indirect, in ways that frustrated even the most diplomatic leaders. The ICC had long been cited as a symbol of accountability, but for leaders in the Sahel, it often represented selective justice, a tool wielded disproportionately against African states, while other global powers remained insulated. The announcement was strategically timed. At the same moment, Burkina Faso's leadership planned to unveil a deepening partnership with Russia, a strategic alliance that encompassed military training, technology transfer, and economic collaboration. While partnerships between African nations and Russia were not new, the scope and speed of this development were unprecedented. Analysts in Moscow spoke of the Sahel as a critical region for future geopolitical influence, a gateway for both security and economic cooperation. Meanwhile, Western capitals scrambled to interpret what the alliance would mean for regional stability and the global balance of power. In the capital's main square, crowds began gathering even before dawn. Citizens held hand-painted signs reading slogans that celebrated sovereignty, regional solidarity, and self-determination. Drummers beat out rhythms that echoed ancient resistance songs, the rhythms resonating through streets and into the surrounding neighborhoods. Across town, in community halls and markets, people debated what this bold move would mean for them, fears of international isolation mingling with hope for newfound independence. The withdrawal from the ICC was framed domestically as an act of liberation. State media emphasized that Africa's legal institutions could now take center stage in adjudicating issues that affected African nations directly. Legal scholars held panels explaining how regional courts, strengthened by cooperation among Sahelian states, could replace external oversight while remaining transparent and just. The narrative was clear: the continent was reclaiming authority over its destiny. Meanwhile, the strategic partnership with Russia was unveiled with careful ceremony. Military officers marched in precise formations, signaling discipline and readiness. Russian advisors oversaw demonstrations of tactical training, advanced communication systems, and new logistic strategies. In parallel, economic initiatives were announced. Energy development, infrastructure projects, and arms modernization programs designed not to provoke conflict, but to assert regional security and technological independence. Foreign observers scrambled to respond. Analysts in Europe and North America released cautious statements, emphasizing concerns about legal accountability, geopolitical alignment, and regional stability. Headlines hinted at chaos, risk, and unpredictability. Yet within the capitals of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the tone was one of pride. Citizens, for the first time in decades, felt their leaders acting decisively, not for foreign approval, but in alignment with national and regional interests. In Ouagadougou, the leader stood at a podium in the main square, addressing tens of thousands gathered under the rising sun. "Today, we reclaim our voice," he proclaimed, his words amplified by speakers that carried across the city. "We are no longer subjects of distant judgments. We are authors of our destiny." Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso stand united in this declaration. "We honor justice, but we will not surrender our sovereignty. We honor peace, but we will defend our people. And we will build partnerships that respect our independence and vision." As his words reverberated, a subtle but significant tension rippled through international media channels. For years, the Sahel had been framed primarily as a zone of instability. Conflict, terrorism, climate crisis, and poverty dominated headlines. Now, these nations were redefining their narrative, not as passive recipients of aid and instruction, but as active agents shaping security, law, and diplomacy. This was a seismic shift, invisible to those who only glanced at numbers and statistics, but palpable to anyone attuned to the rhythm of power. In neighboring Mali, citizens followed live broadcasts of the square in Ouagadougou. Students in Bamako waved flags in solidarity. Market vendors paused their work to listen to speeches over radios. Local journalists highlighted the significance of the joint withdrawal from the ICC, explaining in lay terms how regional autonomy and judicial self-determination were intertwined. Across Niger, similar scenes unfolded, each nation reinforcing a narrative of shared purpose and collective sovereignty. The Russian alliance added another layer of complexity. Military observers in Africa noted that Russia had decades of experience operating in diverse and challenging terrains, as well as expertise in logistics, communications, and tactical support. Partnering with such a power promised accelerated modernization for Burkina Faso's forces while providing strategic depth to Mali and Niger through cooperative training programs. Economically, the partnership offered avenues for infrastructure development, trade agreements, and access to energy and mining technologies that Western partners had historically limited. Yet, the symbolism of the move resonated beyond military or economic calculations. For decades, African leaders had often been forced to navigate a dual reality, satisfying international expectations while attempting to respond to local needs. Today, the Sahelian nations were demonstrating that they could set terms on their own, cultivating alliances that respected mutual interests rather than perpetuating dependency. In the capital of Burkina Faso, journalists gathered in the National Broadcast Center to cover the event. Cameras captured sweeping aerial views of the square, where crowds swelled with thousands of people clad in colorful attire, waving flags and cheering. The atmosphere was charged, electric with pride and a sense of historical gravity. Interviewed citizens expressed a mixture of defiance, hope, and excitement, emotions rarely portrayed in global media narratives about the Sahel. Meanwhile, inside government offices, advisors worked tirelessly to coordinate legal, diplomatic, and security measures following the ICC withdrawal. International law experts drafted frameworks for regional courts to handle cases previously under ICC jurisdiction. Diplomatic teams prepared statements explaining the decisions to global partners, emphasizing sovereignty, accountability, and respect for human rights. Military leaders assessed operational readiness in light of the new Russian partnership, ensuring that training schedules, equipment transfers, and joint exercises were synchronized across borders. As dusk fell over Ouagadougou, the celebrations shifted from public squares to smaller, intimate gatherings. Families discussed what these changes might mean for education, security, trade, and employment. Young people, who had grown up witnessing cycles of conflict and foreign oversight, felt a surge of possibility. an understanding that the narrative of dependency was being replaced by one of self-determination. At the same time, foreign capitals continued to speculate. Analysts questioned how the partnership with Russia might affect European influence in the region. Diplomatic cables discussed potential sanctions, financial restrictions, and shifts in military strategy. Yet within the Sahel, such concerns were viewed as secondary. Citizens and leaders alike understood that sovereignty was not granted. It was asserted through deliberate and unified action. By nightfall, Burkina Faso's leader returned home, reflecting on the events of the day. The decision to exit the ICC and deepen ties with Russia had been fraught with risk, yet he sensed the magnitude of what had been achieved. This was not a simple political maneuver. It was a statement of identity, a reaffirmation of agency, and a signal to the world that the Sahelian nations could chart a course independent of traditional pressures. The celebrations continued in subdued but meaningful ways across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In markets, in mosques and churches, in homes and schools, discussions revolved around the same theme. Africa could act, decide, and lead without asking permission. The partnership with Russia, controversial in some quarters, was seen domestically as a tool for empowerment rather than domination, a means to accelerate development and secure national interests. As the stars emerged over the Sahel, the vast expanse of the desert seemed to mirror the possibilities of the future. The sands had witnessed centuries of trade, conquest, and resistance. Now, they bore silent witness to a political and strategic realignment that could redefine the continent's relationship with global powers. In the quiet of the night, a generation of leaders, citizens, and youth understood that history was being made, and that they were not merely observers, but participants shaping the narrative. The morning after the announcement, the streets of Ouagadougou were alive with discussions of sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Markets buzzed not just with commerce, but with debates over geopolitics, a rare sight in a region often portrayed by outsiders as preoccupied solely with survival. In universities, professors used the ICC exit as a case study on law, diplomacy, and self-determination. Students pored over maps and historical texts, drawing connections between past struggles against colonial imposition and the present moment of assertive independence. The story of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso no longer existed solely in foreign news feeds. It had been claimed, interpreted, and celebrated as a homegrown narrative. Military bases across Burkina Faso began rigorous joint exercises with Russian advisors. Soldiers trained in modern communications, logistics, and urban warfare, while officers focused on strategic planning, counterinsurgency, and regional security cooperation. The drills were precise and efficient, designed to convey readiness not for aggression, but for defense, an unmistakable message to both domestic and international audiences that the Sahelian nations would protect their sovereignty and regional interests. Analysts in Moscow noted the speed of integration. The Russian military, accustomed to complex operational environments, viewed Burkina Faso's forces as disciplined and adaptive, ready to expand their joint capabilities in months rather than years. Across Niger, a new legal task force convened to implement mechanisms that would ensure judicial independence while maintaining accountability. The task force examined the feasibility of regional courts empowered to handle cases previously under ICC jurisdiction. Experts emphasized transparency, community engagement, and robust appeals processes. They argued that sovereignty could not come at the cost of fairness. Legitimacy, they insisted, must arise from law that respected both tradition and modern human rights standards. Meanwhile, Mali took the lead in regional coordination, establishing communication channels among the three nations to synchronize legal, military, and economic initiatives. Ministers traveled between capitals, facilitating dialogue and ensuring consistent messaging to domestic audiences. Across radio waves, citizens learned of the measures being implemented. Community leaders explained the exit from the ICC in plain language, emphasizing that justice had not been abandoned. It had simply been reclaimed and redefined under African leadership. International reactions continued to vary. In European capitals, diplomats convened emergency briefings, analyzing potential consequences. The exit from the ICC was framed as destabilizing, while the Russian partnership was described as provocative. Financial institutions released cautious reports warning of potential risks. Meanwhile, policy papers and think tanks speculated on broader implications for Africa's relationship with the West, highlighting both security and resource considerations. Yet within the Sahel, such warnings were met with skepticism. Citizens and leaders understood that the era of externally dictated decisions had come to an end. The future would be determined at home, not abroad. In Ouagadougou's industrial districts, discussions extended beyond law and military matters. Economists and business leaders examined opportunities arising from the strengthened Russian partnership. Joint ventures in mining technology, energy, and infrastructure were announced. The collaboration promised access to machinery, technical expertise, and financial support, enabling projects that had been stalled for years due to resource constraints. Analysts noted that the initiative could serve as a template for South-South cooperation, demonstrating how African nations could engage powerful allies without compromising autonomy. In villages across Burkina Faso, citizens debated what the ICC exit and Russian alliance meant for ordinary lives. Farmers, traders, and teachers shared opinions on markets, education, and security. Many expressed hope that the realignment would bring infrastructure development, technological transfer, and protection from external interference. Others voiced caution, wary of over-reliance on any foreign power. Across all discussions, however, a sense of collective purpose was evident, a recognition that the nation was charting its own path and that history would judge them not by external approval but by tangible results on the ground. In Mali, students in Bamako organized debates on sovereignty and international law. Universities invited legal scholars from across Africa to discuss the implications of ICC withdrawal, emphasizing the potential for a more balanced, locally accountable justice system. Citizens watched live streams of these debates, engaging in forums and community meetings to understand the broader context. The exercise of dialogue reinforced the notion that Africa could make decisive moves while maintaining intellectual rigor, legal legitimacy, and civic participation. In Niger, security officials integrated lessons from regional exercises into national planning. They coordinated intelligence sharing initiatives with Burkina Faso and Mali, establishing protocols for rapid response to threats while ensuring civilian protection. Russian advisors provided technical guidance, sharing operational models refined over decades of experience in complex terrains. The integration of foreign expertise with local knowledge created a hybrid approach that was uniquely suited to the Sahel, balancing tradition with modern strategic imperatives. As the days progressed, a symbolic narrative began to take hold. The Sahelian nations were no longer passive subjects in global geopolitics. They were actors asserting influence. Analysts noted that the exit from the ICC and the Russian partnership challenged established power structures in subtle but significant ways. Western countries had long relied on legal and institutional mechanisms to shape African policy. Now, the Sahelian bloc demonstrated that alternative paths were possible, paths that respected sovereignty while engaging strategically with powerful allies. This shift was not only political but psychological. Citizens reported increased confidence in leadership decisions. Entrepreneurs explored cross-border trade opportunities in new sectors, including technology, energy, and logistics. Women's associations leveraged enhanced financial access to develop small enterprises. Farmers experimented with improved irrigation and crop management techniques funded through newly mobilized resources. The exit from the ICC and the Russian partnership became a catalyst for holistic development, fostering economic, social, and civic empowerment. Across media channels, both domestic and international, the narrative became more complex. Global outlets oscillated between framing the Sahelian nations as risky and framing them as bold. Commentators debated the implications for regional stability, resource governance, and global alliances. Yet within Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the story was different. It was about agency, resilience, and the capacity to determine destiny. Citizens increasingly understood that external narratives often sought to constrain rather than illuminate. By claiming their own voice, the Sahelian nations were redefining the rules of engagement. Meanwhile, military exercises continued to evolve. Joint maneuvers demonstrated integrated command structures, rapid deployment capabilities, and sophisticated logistics planning. Soldiers trained in both desert and urban environments, ensuring preparedness for a range of scenarios. Russian advisors emphasized mentorship and knowledge transfer rather than domination, creating a model in which local forces retained full control of operational decisions. The synergy reinforced the notion that strategic alliances could enhance sovereignty rather than diminish it. In Ouagadougou, public spaces remained hubs of discussion and reflection. Citizens attended forums explaining how legal reforms, security coordination, and economic projects would interconnect. Visual demonstrations illustrated plans for regional courts, infrastructure improvements, and joint technological initiatives. Children in schools learned the history behind the ICC, the rationale for withdrawal, and the potential benefits of strategic partnerships. In this way, education and civic awareness became intertwined with geopolitics, ensuring that the next generation understood both the challenges and the opportunities inherent in asserting independence. The Russian partnership also provided a platform for economic diversification. Energy projects targeted both urban and rural needs, emphasizing renewable resources alongside traditional infrastructure. Mining and industrial modernization efforts created employment and technical training opportunities. Trade agreements allowed local industries to access new markets while retaining ownership and control. For citizens, these developments represented a tangible benefit of geopolitical strategy, a demonstration that sovereignty could translate into prosperity. Across the Sahel, analysts observed the ripple effects. Neighboring nations watched closely, assessing whether similar moves might serve their interests. International law scholars debated the precedent set by ICC withdrawal. Military strategists studied the operational models developed through joint exercises. Economists projected long-term impacts on trade flows, resource governance, and regional integration. The Sahelian bloc, once viewed as peripheral actors, had now become a focal point in discussions about the future of African autonomy and global power distribution. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens continued to interpret events in their daily lives. Markets, workshops, schools, and farms became microcosms for the broader geopolitical realignment. Conversations shifted from mere survival to strategy, cooperation, and self-determination. The exit from the ICC and the Russian partnership were no longer abstract policies. They were forces shaping the very environment in which people lived, worked, and aspired. In the evenings, cultural expressions reinforced the momentum. Music, poetry, and theater reflected themes of sovereignty, pride, and collective purpose. Drummers and singers performed compositions celebrating resilience, historical struggle, and new alliances. Artistic communities highlighted the narrative that Africa could act decisively, engage strategically, and thrive independently. Across cities and villages, citizens internalized these messages, blending them into both daily life and collective identity. At the leadership level, Burkina Faso's government coordinated closely with Mali and Niger to monitor outcomes, address challenges, and plan next steps. Regular high-level meetings ensured alignment across legal, economic, and military domains. Russian advisors continued to provide support, while ensuring that ultimate decision-making rested firmly with local authorities. This model of cooperation, assertive yet balanced, symbolized a new approach to strategic partnership, one in which sovereignty, agency, and mutual respect were non-negotiable. As the sun set over the Sahel, casting long shadows across desert sands and city streets, a sense of historic momentum filled the air. Citizens understood that their nations had made bold, unconventional decisions, and that the consequences would unfold over decades. Yet, unlike previous eras of externally imposed change, this time the narrative was theirs to control. The world had been shocked, the Sahel had awakened.